5 attendees. Apologize for the slightly late start, but we've got it now. And thank you all for joining us. We've got it recording. Looks like we're good to go. It's on YouTube, right? Yes, live on YouTube. Okay, great. So I will call the meeting to order at 1:06. And our usual message, which is this meeting is being conducted in accordance with State of California Executive Order N2920, dated March 17th, 2020. All members of the Legislative Committee of the Santa Clara, Santa Cruz County Roundtable are participating in this meeting by video conference with no physical meeting location. Members of the public wishing to observe the meeting may do so in Zoom or on YouTube. And I see 5 participants, which is great. And as noted on the meeting agenda, members of the public may provide public comments for all items during the public comment period. And if you could make sure you've registered via the link, that would be great. And all emails that were received prior to 10 a.m. today were forwarded to the committee, and emails received after that time, but prior to the close of public comment on that item, will be read into the record. So I guess Steve or Evan, did we get any emails after 10 o'clock today?
Yes, I just checked, and we got 2 from Mr. Holbrook. And I can forward them to you, Lisa, right now. That's okay?
Okay. Great, thank you. And so we'll read those into the record. So we'll start by taking attendance. And in case people have forgotten, we had to scale back on the number of members of the Ledge Committee because the number of participants in the roundtable has reduced, and we couldn't have a quorum of the entire roundtable as the Ledge Committee. So we have 3 people, Glenn, Kathy, and me. So if you guys just want to, Glenn and Kathy, state your name for the record and the city you are with.
Glenn Hendricks, City of Sunnyvale, attending.
Kathy Watanabe, City of Santa Clara, attending.
Thank you. And Lisa Matichak, City of Mountain View. And we also have Steve Alverson and Evan Watson from ESA here with us. And it looks like Christina might have dropped off. But thank you, Christina, for getting this going. So we'll start with item 3, which is oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the committee on any matter that is not on the agenda. And speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 3 minutes during this section. And state law prohibits the committee from acting on non-agenda items. So if you would like to speak, please raise your hand. And we'll start with Darlene Yapley.
Hello, Robert Holbrook, myself, and several community members across the U.S. have created a chart to track the FAA Reauthorization Bill 2018, and in particular, sections that are related to noise and health impacts. This was submitted for the agenda packet, and in our email, we've identified several sections linked to noise metrics and health impacts. So the good news is that the Ledge Committee doesn't have to start from scratch, but it can build on previous work that the congressionals did. So ideally, we could use whatever future position statements come out of this committee to apply that to commenting on deliverables from the FAA, et cetera, when they're released. But this can be discussed later in the agenda. The question today, though, is how can we best track this chart, because the deliverables matter to us. For example, section 189 on the chart is a study on potential health and economic impacts of overflight noise. So this is highly relevant, and it even mentions Northern California as one of the areas that will be included. So has this study been initiated? and what area in Northern California is participating or will participate. So the question again is, who is best to track and follow up on the chart? Is this something that's tracked by the congressional reps or their staff? Does the Quiet Skies Caucus track this? There is an organization called NOISE that many cities in the San Francisco Roundtable belong to. Do they track it? And if none of those are the case, does it make sense for the consultant to, again, pending what type of cost would be involved with that? So is it possible that someone is already tracking this that could help us? So that's kind of what I want to put out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer Landesman?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you. My comment is about the IFP Gateway, which it's a little bit similar to the previous comment about tracking what matters to us. And I would say that along with building on the previous work that the congressionals have done with legislation, a local tracking system needs to work with the IFP Gateway, which have procedures that impact the public. And the message is not getting across at the larger roundtable because there has been no progress from just simply reformatting the IFP Gateway, which really anyone can look at the IFP Gateway and see what's going on. What the public cannot possibly know is what are the environmental A, if it impacts them, B, what are the environmental determinations that the FAA is making for those procedures? And there hasn't been an analysis of that. There hasn't been any progress. And I've been speaking about this from the start. And I just want to remind you also that if you were at the roundtable meeting where a staff person from the city of Palo Alto spoke, I found it interesting that that was the one item that the city of Palo Alto chose to speak about is the IFP Gateway. This is really relevant if you're going to try to influence how the public is engaged with airspace procedures. And I hope the legislative committee, because legislation could be written to actually improve this. If this is not getting through or across, if we can't do it just with common sense tracking, then maybe legislation is appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Holbrook.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
And we have 2 minutes for comments. Is that correct?
Oh, you have 3, sorry.
Okay. So I'd like to endorse and build upon the comments that Darlene just made regarding the FAA Reauthorization Act and the sections in it that are relevant to us. I agree with everything she said there. But I'd also like to offer a few thoughts that kind of carry that into the topics that we're going to be discussing today in a way that isn't specific to any particular topic. And I think this might be the best place to speak to that. First, I think that this committee is going to be most effective if it acknowledges and builds upon the legislative scaffolding that's already in place. And I'd like to thank Member Watanabe for her work to provide us with the list of pending legislation in agenda item 6, very helpful. That's one leg of the scaffolding. Another is the FAA Reauthorization Act that Darlene and I submitted yesterday. And there are many things in there that pertain to our concerns. I see the work of this committee and what we're to discuss today as proceeding through various study areas, many of which are somewhat interrelated. The first two that we're considering today are metrics and health and environment. As we've seen in the past, the committee is going to be called upon to draft letters that capture the roundtable sentiment on some topic that's near at hand. I mean, recently it was supersonic, often with limited notice. And to aid in that drafting process, I think that it would be very helpful for this committee to pre-clear positions that we can use in the future for whatever upcoming letter needs to be done, perhaps on short notice. And so I see us as developing position papers that are vetted by the roundtable as a whole, to which the drafter of a letter could refer when coming up with a comment letter to be sent to our legislators, and that would have the backing of the roundtable. I see this as an ongoing process. It's going to take, I mean, it just gets better and better as we develop a store of positions that get more and more refined. And this morning, I submitted a very rough draft of one such position paper. It was speaking mainly to metrics, but the point was really more about the process that we might want to consider as we move forward. Thank you for your consideration of that.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the committee on an item not on the agenda? I don't see any more hands up in the box, and I don't believe there's anyone on the phone. Evan, do you see anybody on the phone? Okay, I see you shaking your head now. Okay, great. So we'll close this portion of the meeting. Thank you all for your comments. And we will move on to the next items. That is 4, which noise max. And I will let, I'll ask committee member Hendricks if he wants to start this discussion. And I imagine this is kind of going to be a robust discussion.
Yeah, hi, thanks. Yeah, I'm all for robust discussions and stuff. What I did was, what I thought coming out of the last meeting was, I was asked to put together just a draft of conceptual ideas of things that we wanted to see put into FAA legislation that would be the ideas to try and, that would be the mover and shaker to change how the FAA works. Right now, I think we can all agree that the FAA does not have to take, regardless of what they think they say, they don't have to take the impact of air noise on the ground when they make procedure changes. If they did, we wouldn't be having all the meetings that we have. So I put together just a rough, not actual language that would go in legislation, but the shopping list of things that we would want our congressional representatives to try and put into every piece of FAA legislation that goes forward. And then presuming at one time or another, something will get passed and then this legislation would be there. And then there would actually be the real thing you could hold your hand onto that says here, the FAA has to use impact of air noise on the ground when making a procedure change. I forwarded that information to Steve. Steve went ahead and fixed my words a little bit. So thank you very much, Steve, for doing that. And I take this as a work in progress that, if, people want to say here, Glenn, you got the right, you started with we, and that's good. And then I want to change everything else. That's fine. Or how we want to go ahead and do it. But it was really, this is a starting point, again, with what I think, and maybe we want to double check with this as a group, that this is really just the objectives or requirements or concepts that we want the congressional people to put in. And if that's really the objective of what we have, then we can go ahead and change the language to whatever the group feels is most appropriate. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Glenn. So let's start with any questions that Kathy, you might have, if any. And you're still on mute, Kathy.
Sorry, I was eating and I didn't want to chew in your ear. But no, thank you. And thank you, Glenn, for putting all of that together. And it helped me give me an idea of how I was going to put my topic together. But I appreciated, Steve's addition and then the additional comments that came in as a result. I mean, it's a great draft that, can definitely be built on and, continue to explore as a committee and as a roundtable. So it's a wonderful starting point. So thank you, Glenn, for your work in putting that together. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you.
So Lisa, if I can just also ask, I mean, I think really the question is, you know, hypothetically, whatever we get is the right language we want, we should probably also have a little bit of a discussion of what do we want to do with it? Because, you know, here, you know, I assume the roundtable will sign off on it, that what we want to do is then is the next step is this to go ahead and be reaching out to our congressional representatives. Would somebody else need to do anything more to kind of clean this up, but to really try and get it front and center in front of our congressional representatives, work with them to get them to understand the importance of this kind of language being included so that they can try and, you know, push forward. Because this draft or getting past the draft is not really the important part, is being able to get to the congressional representatives and say, yes, they're on board with being able to try and put a block section of actual draft language they come up with into every single bill that goes in that's related to the FAA.
So I appreciate what you two have done to get us going on these two topics. As Kathy said, I think this is a great start. As I went through it, I was thinking that perhaps we needed to, as Glenn was somewhat alluding to here, step back for a second and make sure we're on the same page in terms of what we are trying to accomplish with this. If there's a standard format that we might want to turn these into and add more to them. I personally feel like I think it would be helpful to have everybody on the same page, not just the three of us, but the entire roundtable, as well as the members of the public, in terms of why these are the two areas we decided to focus on. Like what is the issue with the current noise metrics that we're trying to solve? I'm not sure everybody really has a good understanding of that. And if we're expecting our congressional representatives to take this forward, I would want to kind of provide that for them, just in case they don't know all the ins and outs, but obviously at a level where they could talk to it to a certain extent. So I think it'd be helpful to have that discussion about what is the end product of this. I completely agree with Glenn's comments about, I want to make sure that what we do here is very action oriented. I don't want to just put together information that then sits on a shelf. I want to make sure that it can be used and that we're proactive about reaching out to folks to tell them how we would like to have it used and help them if they need help from us. So I see Glenn's hand up.
Yeah, I was trying to be polite and do it the right way.
Very good.
I think there's two concepts I thought we were trying to address in what I wrote. The first one is that it appears the FAA does not have to use impact of air noise on the ground when they make their procedure changes. I mean, I know people sometimes point to there's a word here or there that says they do, but they clearly don't, because all across the country they make decisions and they negatively impact people with noise on the ground. And there's nothing anybody ever can do to go, hey, you can't do that because of this rule. So that was the first piece. The second part is there's the noise metric piece that you just kind of mentioned that does not accurately measure the noise on the ground. And we can get into the whole thing of whether or not, and certainly doesn't measure it effectively because they do everything as a cumulative noise event. It doesn't take anything into account in terms of single noise events and the way the way that whole metric is put together, even if there's something that said they had to use noise on the ground, the current way it's measured doesn't do that very well. So that's what I thought and that in my way of thinking, all the other issues that we end up talking about always come back to those two things: is how is noise measured on the ground and its impact on residents? And is there an actual lever you can use with the FAA that says, here, please stop negatively impacting people because of the noise? And if we could get those two things done and focus on those two things, then a lot of things would get better. So I thought that's the problem we were trying to work on.
I don't disagree with that. I'm just trying to think of the audiences for this, and have we provided enough information for them?
If we need to provide more explanation of what I just said, and oh, by the way, I just give this clip to the actual Congress members and let them, see it. I mean, on a certain level, I think the Congress people actually know what the problem is. And again, an example of it is the supersonic air noise thing. They went ahead and gave the FAA permission to go do this experiment. And then they came to all the roundtable and said, here, give us all your information about why you shouldn't, you don't like this. I mean, they kind of gave confusing information to the FAA, I think. But I'm sure either Steve or somebody else, or we could put together a more detailed, clarifying explanation of those specific problems we're trying to have addressed, if that would be helpful.
I think it would be helpful because I'm not sure the rest of the roundtable understands that. Hopefully they do, but I'm not absolutely convinced. And it's always good to have it for reference. So I actually liked the suggestion that we got from, I think it was Mr. Holbrook, saying this is kind of a position paper where you sort of define the issue, which I think is, that little bit of background for why this is an issue. And then your points, Glenn, about here's the two that we are trying to address, and we would like folks to help us address. And then to me, a third section would just be, and then what do we do with this? Is it talk to our congressional representatives? In terms of noise, I also had I guess I was thinking, but it'd be good to get other people's perspective on this, that it was broader than just the noise when it comes to procedure changes. I was also thinking it's noise when you certify an airplane, and it might be noise at other times as well. And if we're going to define a new policy around how you should measure noise, does it go beyond procedures? And I was thinking it did.
I was using procedures as a very generic term, and if we wanted to articulate out, X, Y, and Z other spots, it's cool with me.
Okay.
It really is. Anytime they do anything that's going to cause, potentially have impact to residents on the ground.
Mhm.
However we want to articulate that. I'm trying to be as broad as possible.
Okay. Kathy?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I mean, based on where, I live, of course, in proximity to SJC, I have heard, I can hear the planes revving their engines, getting warmed up there in the morning at 5 o'clock. So, I mean, if you want to broaden that scope, start it when they're at the gates, getting their engines ready to go, or they're in the hangars. And I've heard complaints from residents as well. Just, they're tired of being woke up at 5:40 in the morning because the engines are they're gunning the engines, getting ready to head on down the runway. So I definitely agree that there could be a broader scope in terms of, capturing the noise on the ground, where it starts and where it finishes. I agree.
Okay. Steve, if I can put
Lisa?
you on the spot.
So
Oh,
Lisa, before you
Yes.
go to Steve, could I just
Oh,
ask
yeah.
the question of where are we going to draw the fence? Because, traditionally around an airport, within X distance of it, there's kind of a little bit of an expectation there's going to be some noise, right? And so to say here it's, noise with, should we define something that says here, noise within this area. And I'm kind of, almost alluding to the traditional, air noise things that have been around airports. If we're going to try and say here, we want the language that says here, an airport can't make any noise at all at the runway, that might be kind of tough. I thought from an air noise perspective, we were kind of talking about what were procedures as it had to do with the comings and goings of the aircraft. And especially when they got to where you really weren't next to the airport. So I think it would be helpful at some point if we clarified how close to this, I think Lisa, when you mentioned engines, I thought you were talking about how when engines get certified, not necessarily that here you're starting up an engine and it's actually at the runway getting ready to take off. And I'm okay with whatever the answer, but I think we should be very clear on which things are included or which things are not.
I agree. I always think it's good to pick the top three on pretty much anything and try to tackle those before you tackle others. So I certainly agree that procedures is right up there at the top. And then I would suggest we figure two other areas where we would want to address this, whether it be certification, as I mentioned, or on the runway, or if there's others. And I'm thinking that Steve can help guide us on this one. What would be the top areas, or if we should do more? Steve?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Lisa. And on that very point, I would advise the Ledge Committee to be very focused on the particular item that they're addressing, because certification of aircraft are very different metrics and very different procedures and regulations than addressing noise and flight procedures or noise around the airport. And I know you guys want to be very targeted and very specific. So I would separate those out. And I think what Glenn prepared here is a great first start on looking at flight procedure noise. It could potentially apply to noise around the airport as well. Set the certification off to the side and then perhaps address that through a different position paper. 2 points that I wanted to make on the paper that Glenn prepared, so that we all have a general sense of this. And one is, Glenn has said that they have standards that they have to meet. And the reality is they do. There are national standards, there are FAA orders that they have to meet. I think the issue, and Glenn said this, is they just never exceed limits. They're always within the limits. So ultimately, I think what we want to focus on is what those limits are, what those regulations are, the metrics, and then go about getting those changed so that they are effective. And when a change will impact people, the process they go through will show that. I think that's what's currently lacking. The key point that is made in Glenn's white paper, which I think is really critical and very different than what happens now, is once a procedure is put into place, it's done. Nothing happens after that. The environmental work has been finished. What the position paper recommends is, no, it's not done. You implement the procedure, you make noise measurements post-procedure and find out what's actually happening on the ground. How are people being affected? And if it's not working the way in which you planned or predicted, then make adjustments to make it work. The system isn't set up that way right now, and I think that's one in which we all grapple with. Community members who are on the phone here, is that once it's in, and it's very difficult to change it after that. So I think that's a really key point of this position paper. One final note.
I totally agree with Steve.
I thought you would.
One final note is that you will see my video going off because I'm having bandwidth issues. So when I turn myself off on video, I can hear you all much better.
Okay, I was wondering if it was mine, because every once in a while it was hard to hear you. Thank you. Kathy, did you have your hand up? Maybe not. Okay, you know what? I am going to do this like the last Ledge Committee meeting and open it up for public comment a few times. But Kathy, did you have something you wanted to say before I do that?
No, thank you.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Lisa, before you go to the public, if I can just kind of ask kind of a procedural, so through this process, we're going to get, comments and enhancements. And so I just wanted to ask kind of the procedural change or question of how we're going to incorporate. And so can I make the suggestion that I really like the way Steve framed what I said? And can I assume that ESA is going to be taking down all the comments of what they hear in our ongoing discussion, that they will be the ones who are going to be creating the next draft of whatever this looks like? Or is the expectation that I'm going to go ahead? I just really wanted to be clear about that, because it's going to make a difference of how close I keep notes.
So I think that depends. I would ask Steve if there is enough budget for ESA to do the next step.
Yes, we definitely can do that, Lisa.
That's great. I appreciate that. Thank you. So Glenn, yep, I agree that I think it'd be great to have ESA take the next step, incorporating our input from the public. Yeah. And then I'm assuming we would have another Ledge Committee meeting to make sure we're good with it before we take it to the roundtable.
And that's fine, but I really think I again, going back to the way Steve framed, some of the things I said, I think he can, if we've got, I'm on the concept piece, and if he can go ahead and start this earlier, we get it into, the right framing and language and stuff that we think is going to be able to go up the chain, the better. So
okay, awesome. Great. Okay, so I'll open it up for public comment now, and I see two hands. Jennifer Landesman, and we'll give you 2 minutes each, because we might come back again. Jennifer Landesman.
Yeah, I don't have the muting. I haven't been invited to, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can
hear you.
Sorry, I was looking for the unmute. Okay, thank you. I think it's so wonderful. Yeah, what Steve has just commented on is really great. And I want to point out a couple of things about noise, what the FAA calls noise reduction, and that's in the certification and reducing the noise at source, and noise management, which is all of this noise in flight. So I would try to stick as close as possible, and thank you, Steve, for commenting that the FAA does have already a framework and it does have rules. It's just the way the rules are working that have not taken care of a lot of the populations that are affected. So I would really stress on distinguishing that. And, I sent an email about what is being termed, I would say, adequacy of process, which includes tools, metrics, pre and post implementation measurements, and actually the appropriateness, let's say, of making a change. And I think they're very different things, but sort of embedded. And I'm sorry, this might sound confusing, but for example, ideally, NextGen should have used a full environmental review, much deeper than an EA, because it does build capacity. Recently, I listened into a NextGen advisory committee, and there's no question that the focus is on increasing throughput and capacity with NextGen. So the levels of review are completely inadequate for the changes that are being imposed on citizens. So I would just also encourage to really kind of have the public understand, because otherwise the public actually understands, but our representatives have not yet articulated this. And then last thing is that I'm a big believer in incentives, and what we're trying to do is for the process to work better in terms of how industry behaves and all that. And back to noise management and noise reduction, sometimes this all has to do with funding and resources. For example, noise reduction has something like the CLEAN program, which is millions of dollars going into that. How much resources are going into noise management? So I just want to, I know this is sort of like a mishmash of things, but I think, I guess I would just say to stick with the framework and distinguish between what is an adequate process to get to an understanding of what's appropriate, and then what's appropriate. And on that last note, I will say that, for example, if we use DNL, 55 DNL is considered by the World Health Organization as the place where health impacts begin. So DNL is not useless. It's a world metric that can be used to assess potential guidelines or rules about things. I don't know that FAA will ever accept it, but let's say if it's in that category of finding what's appropriate. But I think the process is something that can be influenced greatly, and as I mentioned in my email, by your actions today on a regular basis, not just future legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Chair, I have a point of order question for you. I think you said 2 minutes per speaker, but the clock was 3. So could we just be whichever it is that you want?
Well, to be fair to everyone, since Jennifer had 3, I'm going to leave it at 3. And we just will have 1 period instead of several. Darlene?
Yes, thank you, Glenn, for your work on the noise metrics document. It's great to see this progressing. The FAA does model noise so that we can see what would happen to people on the ground. The problem is the standard is not detecting the noise we experience. And the second thing is the tool that they use, AEDT, is optimized for people near the airport. It's not good at modeling for people that are away from the airport. So the tool might be something that we have to address in the legislation as well. The FAA modernized the national airspace with NextGen, but they did not modernize the noise metrics. So they're doing that with supersonic, interesting enough, but they're not doing it as a result of NextGen. DNL is the only metric, and the 65 DNL standard is flawed. So I'm not saying the use of DNL is flawed, but if you only use DNL and don't use something like N above, it's flawed in detecting our experience. So although procedure reviews and the environmental review process are important, Glenn said this, and I think there's got to be a way we communicate this to more people, that many people do not realize that until we changed the standard and the use of the single metric, the discrepancy between what we experience and the FAA's repeated findings of no significant impact is going to continue. This means we can do nothing to stop a next-gen procedure until the standard changes. So the document that Glenn's put together would be an excellent positioning document. My sense is we could refine it and finalize it and then get approval by the roundtable for positions on legislation, starting with metrics, and we could add other things. So you could take the positioning document and work with congressional staff to define and support future legislation. You can take the concepts to write a prep letter to the congressionals for upcoming FAA and Quiet Skies meetings. You could also use the document to comment on deliverables that the FAA releases, like the metrics report. And I don't think people realize how important that metrics report was, because the FAA actually failed to look at other ways of a standard in metrics. They did not do a meaningful evaluation. So that means their conclusion was they're going to continue with their standard and there's no changes. So that's a big yikes. So I value the time of the Ledge Committee, and unfortunately, given previous commitments I had this weekend, I did not have the time to email a more detailed specifics on, giving feedback. And I hope that we'll have an opportunity to do that after today's meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Robert Holbrook?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you for the discussion about the audience and the purpose of this paper. I'd like to offer my perspective on that. I think that the audience for this paper should be this committee and the roundtable. I believe that this paper may be something that the congressionals would be interested in, other policymakers, but I firmly believe that we need a working paper that will continue to evolve as our understanding and proposals evolve, and that gets more and more specific over time. And from that paper, we can craft messages targeted to specific moments in time at which legislators need to take action, usually on specific topics. So that would be, that's the way that I'm hoping that this document will evolve. Not that it might not be something that would be interesting to the congressionals, but it would always be presented as a snapshot of the state of of what we understand at this point in time. Okay, that was the first thought. Secondly, as I was developing the concept paper, which I sent at 10 a.m. this morning, I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at it. I was finding that in addition to concrete recommendations, which I certainly think are important, there is a lot of power in just stating findings. And a finding might be the DNL standard as currently applied has almost no value when used to determine whether an increase in noise will cause significant annoyance to a community. And I'm talking about the 1.5 DNL increase for people in a that are at a 63.5 DNL. It's a higher threshold for people lower than that. I think we could say the DNL 65 contours have almost no value outside the close proximity of an airport. 65 doesn't. And these are statements of issues that trouble us. And we may not have all the answers, but they do define the work that we are going to want to be doing, in my opinion. To speak to the topic that Steve and Glenn brought up, I think it is very important to tie the models to reality. The FAA only uses modeling for approving procedures. It doesn't, and it ties the models to reality in a separate stage, which may well use average conditions over a long period of time that can't, where a headwind of 10 knots this day cancels out with a tailwind of 10 knots on that day. And the net effect is on those 2 days, it's very loud, but that on average, it shows us quiet in the model. So what he's proposed, I think would be very helpful to try and ensure that the models actually come closer to representing reality. Thank you.
Thank you. Marie Jo?
Good afternoon. So I also want to thank Glenn for getting this going. It's a great start. And I want to echo a suggestion or request that Darlene made. I'd like this committee to allow for additional public input after this meeting and before discussing any positioning documents with congressional representatives. And let me explain why through an example. A great idea on the post-implementation review process. The FAA would have to measure the actual impact to check that's not higher than what they had predicted. One question though is, when does this measuring and review part, when does this occur in the FAA environmental review process? In fact, Steve touched upon this earlier, and my position that I really believe that it should occur before the environmental review is signed off. Because once it's signed off, it's over. And let me explain more. When you run tests before sign off, that means you would require the FAA to do things not only in a timely fashion, but more importantly, it would prevent changes that have negative impacts to be implemented for years, because these changes would be suspended after the test and until the actual data show no negative impacts. And by the way, I know from an extra air traffic controller that the FAA can run tests. So in contrast, if you put that measuring review part after the sign off of the environmental review, then the FAA can implement changes that they do today, and the affected residents could be subjected to negative impacts for a long time, as long as it would take the FAA to fix the problems, which could take years or may never be fixed. So this example of input that I just used, I think needs to be considered before finalizing this document or to improve this document. Another example, is noise metrics and standard. We don't need to invent new metrics. They exist already. These supplemental metrics exist. What we need to do is for the FAA to use these other metrics and thresholds beyond the single DNL metric and standard. So there are other examples like this. So unfortunately, because I had commitment this weekend, I could not email my comment before this meeting. So therefore, what I would like to propose is, or request, is that the public be allowed to provide input after this meeting. And if you agree to that, then let us know if we should send our input to Steve and by when. And thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer T.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Great job, by the way. Thank you for taking care of the paper. Couple of things. I agree completely with Robert that we need some sort of background here that really specifies what's happening now so that a layman can understand what the problem is. I think that's a great idea. But a couple of things. Again, what Steve said about the before and after, and that a procedure should not be set in stone once it's implemented. That needs to be approached in this document in a very clear way. A couple of other things in thinking about airports and directly around airports and then farther from airports, perhaps something could be implemented in this paper or written in this paper about gradients outside the airport. For example, the expectation is 10 miles out, 20 miles out, so that there's not a single DNL, but as you move farther from an airport, the expectation is to be less and less loud, let's say. And of course, single noise events have to be addressed as well in the paper. The other thing that I did like in the paper is on the 5th bullet, it's kind of mentioning efficiency and noise should be at the same level. Right now, that's not the case. Efficiency is prioritized over noise, but I'm going to push this a little bit farther. I'm going to say in metroplexes, perhaps because there's so much population there, but perhaps in metroplexes, it should be noise over efficiency, specifically in metroplexes where they're highly populated. And then finally, when we're looking at some of the verbiage in here, there's some verbiage that states things like, in comparing the, post-implementation, you want to look at defined in the approved flight procedures environmental documentation. And while I understand that, it's a little concerning because that's exactly kind of what they do now. They look at the 65 DNL. So I think what we're trying to get to is that ultimately there's no increase in noise over the prior noise in that specific area. And I think that needs to be clear somehow in this paper as well. By putting simply that they have to just meet this approved flight procedure, the FAA can set any guidance or any amount as they have now, the 65 DNL, that they will never meet. So we need to be kind of clear on what our expectations are. And that's a little bit difficult, but at the same time, I think we can do it if a bunch of minds come together. Otherwise, we're not protecting anyone, we're giving them an out. And that would be of some concern. We want to make sure we're protecting residents and not accidentally or inadvertently giving them an out, the FAA an out. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other hands up from members of the public. So I'll bring it back to the committee. I had a couple questions based upon some comments that were made. First one's for Steve. Do you track the action items that the FAA has from the reauthorization bill? Are those being tracked at all by you?
Yes, we do, Lisa, and we also work with the various industry groups that we have contacts with out there who are tracking them well, as well, such as the Airports Council International North America, Airlines for America, other agencies that we interact on an ongoing basis. So we do our best to stay on top of them and then also tap these other resources that are tracking them as well.
Awesome. Are those on the SCSC website? Roundtable, that is, not the Cities Association?
That's a good question. We have so many matrices up there now.
Yeah.
Evan, do you recall if we have a specific one that's related to the various sections of the FAA Reauthorization Act?
No, we do not have anything on the website currently for that.
So
Yeah,
is it
we
possible
can definitely
to, yeah, I was going to say, is it possible to add that? Because it sounds like you're already doing it.
Yeah, we can do it.
That's awesome. Thank you. And then I'm curious, Steve, about your thoughts about measuring noise at the airport. So I appreciated Glenn's comments and Kathy's comments, and I'm not sure I have a perspective on this, but I was wondering if you did.
Yes, certainly there are airports that monitor noise at airports. There are also noise measurements that are taken as a part of the environmental process when various procedures are approved. I think it was Jennifer T. who suggested this sort of gradation as you move further away from the airport that you have different standards. Of course, the noise contours do that themselves. As you get further away and aircraft get higher, the noise levels get lower. So conceptually right now, I can't think of a way where you could treat everyone sort of fairly and put that gradation in place, but it is relatively straightforward to measure both close to the airport and far away from the airport, and do that noise modeling in both locations as well. And one other comment related to that, it was noted that the ADT may not be as good as modeling noise for flight procedures as it is close in. That's partially true. When the ADT used to be in its old form called the Integrated Noise Model, or INM, it was very focused on the airport-centric area. As it's been improved over time, it has been modified to allow the FAA and other users to look a little bit further out. But just like any model, it's garbage in, garbage out. If you do a really good job of modeling those procedures, to the extent that the model is within the model's capability, then you can get reliable results. At least at a minimum, if you're comparing the before procedure to the after procedure, you can get an apples to apples comparison and have some sense of what the change is. The drawback, the challenge always is, then how does that apply to how people on the ground will react to it?
Glenn.
Yeah, thanks. To our members of the public, thanks for commenting, but I heard a whole lot of different things in the middle of all that. And, I kind of want to go back to how we focus on what we're doing right here. And also there's a little bit of a question of, I think, how this subcommittee is going to work. I didn't want to go to the public comment piece, but there were some suggestions there of here, this whole spreadsheet that we might track what's going on and all those kind of things. I didn't think that was, we talked about that, I thought, at a previous one of our subcommittee meetings, and trying to talk about what was our focus of what we were going to do. Were we going to try and track and understand all the different pieces of legislation that were going on? And I thought the answer was no. One of the members of the public said, well, this would be a great position paper and it should be used by the roundtable and the public. And that we would have some other kind of documents or things that would go to the congressional offices. I'm confused by that. I'd really like to hear from my colleagues what it is we're trying to do. I thought we were trying to come up with what was a legislative thing to try and get Congress to focus on that would help with, the problem of noise on the ground. And I'm confused of, kind of, Lisa, you said here, let's be action oriented. I'm confused what we're going to do right now that becomes that action oriented thing. And then the thing about noise close to the airport or far away, I thought where we were a little bit concerned was airport noise or noise away from the airports. What's happening with South Flow as it goes over Sunnyvale and Cupertino and Mountain View? And, we have members who come talk to us, or members of the public who talk about what's going on at Santa Cruz that's, that's caused by SFO and other places there. So I think we want to be understanding and putting our legislative direction, that what we want is that it's going to help the people that are having problems that are away from the airport. So again, those are all kind of, I'm a little bit across the board here on what my comments here, because I'm just really trying to understand, we're a legislative subcommittee that I thought was trying to put information and have actions that go to the real legislators that are doing something. And it may mean we're going to be doing something out of the normal bounds of other roundtables, because there's lots of other roundtables that have been in place for years and they haven't been completely effective yet. And so maybe some of the things we need to do need to be a little bit of out of the mainstream and try these things to try and get the legislators to focus on particular language they need to get done. So I'll stop there.
So thanks, Glenn, and thanks, Steve. The reason I was asking some of the questions I was asking, especially about the FAA reauthorization bill, is because some of those actions are tied into noise or in health and environmental impacts. And so I wanted to make sure at a minimum, we can see what's happening there, because it might tie in with what we're doing on these two topics. I wasn't interested in absolutely everything, but if Steve has it, it doesn't hurt to put it up there. But that's why I was asking about that. Glenn.
So yeah, so I mean, I'm all cool for being able to have the information there, but that seems to me that that's a roundtable piece, not necessarily the legislative subcommittee. You know, Tom Pike, offline to one of the meetings we had here, he had provided me or us, or I forget who, a whole list of different legislation that was going through Congress about air noise for the FAA. And then somebody had looked up and said, there's some legislative scorecard somewhere it says, and how much is any of that legislation likely to pass through Congress? And almost all of them were at 0. So I thought that's what, you know, the intent of trying to put this, getting this language together that we can give to our Congress people is here's language that should go in every single piece of legislation that goes about the FAA. And at some point, one of those is going to get passed, which means the language would get passed. You know, that's kind of the approach I thought, or I was thinking of, is let's figure out what it is that we need to have added that does, as Steve pointed out, gets them to actually use the right noise metric and then follow through to make sure, you know, we get the results we think we want to have, and somehow get that legislation passed. And to be singular focused on ways that achieve that.
I don't necessarily disagree with that. I do want to be focused and I do want to be action oriented. I feel like sometimes we talk about more than that and then we get to, you know, here's what we're going to do. So, you know, maybe that's just my style to talk about more things and then focus, because we did have a lot of input from folks, and I want to acknowledge that and have us consider it as we figure out what we're going to do here. I will say that the reason the legislation is there is because I added that thinking that maybe what we want to do, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, is just take a look at that, and maybe not this time, but is there anything in there that for the next legislative session we think should go forward, was kind of my objective of talking about that. Not that we're going to track it. I just looked them up real quick and saw that nothing had changed and they were all still at a very low %. So I do think we need to, as several folks have mentioned, you know, who is the audience for this? And I do think it's the roundtable, the Ledge Committee, and I actually do think it's our congressional representatives, but that's it. Mostly because I want to make sure they and their staffs know enough about this that they can run with it and talk to somebody about it, because we're not always going to be with them. So I guess I see Kathy with her hand up. Maybe can we decide on really who are we targeting this to? Because I think that will impact the level of detail and the length of this as we go forward. Kathy?
Yeah, no, okay, yeah, I'm on. I agree. I agree with everything that you just said, Lisa. I just made some quick notes here. I mean, you know, we are taking all this information to bring to the roundtable, but, you know, I have to say, I consider what we hear from the public very, very important, because it's because of roundtables have come about because of complaints from the public, and that there needed to be action taken. And so I see the public is just as important to the roundtable as the members themselves, as the policymakers. And but at the same time, you know, what I appreciate hearing is just the perspectives that maybe sometimes we don't think about. And because we're still, these are the people that are on the ground. These are the people that are experiencing issues on a day-to-day basis. So their input is important to be able to put together a paper and recommendations to bring to the legislative committee, because they are ultimately the people that we need on our side to effect change, and along with our congressional representatives. So those are my thoughts. But I think ultimately what we're doing here is collecting information and sorting through it, and still being able to focus. I think there are sometimes there are some topics that stand out more than others, but at the same time, ultimately, the goal is to take it to the Congress and make some change. So that's all I have.
Okay. So I do want to acknowledge the comments that came in after 10 o'clock this morning. And there's an email from Robert Holbrook where it lists the relevant portions of the pending legislation, as well as the Reauthorization Act for noise and then health and environment. And I think those are helpful when it comes to making sure we're tracking what's happening, especially with the Reauthorization Act sections as it pertains to these two topics. And then there's another comment that, sorry, it's for item 5, so I'll hold off on that one. Okay, so I hear that we've got 3 audiences: the Roundtable, the Ledge Committee, and our congressional representatives. Glenn, did you have something else you wanted to add?
No, I was just going to say, I think it's our audience is the congressional people, which means because it's coming from the Roundtable and all our public that's part of this, they're part of that audience as well. So,
Okay.
But it's the 3 you said.
Okay. I'm assuming Steve has been taking great notes. I also have a lot of notes here. I do want to respond because it was on my list as well, but I think Jennifer Landis, no, actually Marie Jo mentioned this. I think it is important for the public, now that they know kind of where we're heading with this, if they want to provide additional input, they should, obviously do that. And so, Steve, I'd ask you, would they send it to you directly? And by what date?
What I would suggest, Lisa, is sending it to you as the Roundtable, as the Legislative Committee Chair. So that it flows through the committee. You can collect that up and send it to us. We're happy for you to set the date whenever you want to, how long you want to give the public to provide that input is fine with us. Once we get it, then we'll start working on tightening up and revising the paper.
Okay, so since this is going to come back to the Ledge Committee, and let's see, we have to have these every 3 months. Is that the schedule? Because we'd have a technical working group 1 month, Ledge Committee next month, and Roundtable the other month, if I recall correctly.
Space, that's kind of the way that it would work.
Sorry, Steve, did you say that's the way it was work?
Yeah, I said if you want to space them out, that's the way that it would work. We have 12 total meetings, so 4 Roundtable, 4 Ledge Committee, and 4 technical working groups. And so if you have a couple of Ledge Committee hot issues that need to be addressed and you need to tighten the timing of those meetings up, you could do that. But that would mean that you'd have to have more space in between future meetings. And if you want to run it at a very even pace, then it would essentially be every other month.
Okay. So given that, I would like to give folks time to work on this. 1, 2, 3. So I'm looking at maybe September, that's a bad date, 9/11. But that gives folks about a month. I see Glenn's hand up.
Yeah, and it's not about the date, but it's kind of a procedural question of how we want to use comments from the public. So I have a little bit of experience of writing one of these things back when we had the ad hoc committee, and I was the author of this. So it's kind of just an expectation question that are we expecting Steve to include every comment that he gets from the public into the final document that he produces? It's because
I'm not. I'm
okay,
expecting
I
it to
just
be,
somehow we should give, and I
yeah.
don't know how without seeing what comments are that come from people, how to say what should be included or what not, but maybe you could just give some guidance to the public that we're going to take everybody's comments and somehow include what we think is appropriate or not. I don't know how to say that, but to set people's expectations of what will happen.
Yeah, well, I think you basically just said it. I appreciate public input on this. We have said the areas where we're going to focus. And so if it's outside of those areas, it would not be included. We're counting on Steve to sort through and see if he's covered it already in what he's written. But yeah, I don't expect absolutely everything to be included.
Awesome, thanks.
Yep. So I'd say September 11th would be the deadline. That gives folks some time. But if you want to do it ahead of time, feel free to send it to me. And anything else on this one? I feel like this was going to be the longer of the two topics because we did have to sort through some procedure and syncing up on audience and things like that. So I think the next topic will go a little bit faster. But is there anything else on this one? Steve?
Yeah, just on the emailing process, as we always suggest, and the group of members of the public we have on the phone are great at doing this, is to use the SCSC roundtable@gmail.com email address in the CC when you send it to Lisa, so that it allows us to track the emails that are coming in. That just makes it easier for us. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, folks can just use my city email, lisa.matichak@mountainview.gov. Okay, anything else on item 4? I don't see any hands up. So we'll move to item 5. And if Kathy, if you wanted to give us a quick overview of that.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Chair. And yeah, this was, I know that this ties in a lot with the topic that we just were discussing, and but it's just as important. And I first of all, I want to thank Darlene. Darlene had sent me some information after our last meeting to give me some leeway or heads up on some direction. And also, I want to correct Mr. Holbrook. He mentioned about the list of legislative bills that were put together, and that was actually Chair Matichak's hard work on that. So I really had nothing to do with them, only just submitting some additional legislative information, but she put that great table together. So all credit to her. So anyway, going through the health and environmental impact, I think it's pretty clear to say that, as we read through this, it's pretty self-explanatory. But at the same time, one thing that I discovered from reading through a lot of different documents that I, just Googled was how even as environmental reports are put together, that really a lot of information regarding health impacts on communities is not taken into consideration, and so as policymakers, it made me think about how I make decisions, and what changes do I need to think about going forward, and especially like the airport commission that Chair Matichak and Councilmember Hendricks serve on through the county. I happened to be sitting on one of those meetings one night and heard about a project that was actually going to be built in the pathway of the takeoff, the planes taking off at SJC. And it was really, really interesting for me to hear what needed to go into making those decisions, but what effect the airport was going to have in building such a project. And I learned some terminology that night. And I think it's something that we as policymakers really need to be more aware of, in terms of protecting the health of residents and the impact of noise on their lives. So in terms of recommendations, I know that the Roundtable is going to continue to monitor and advocate for proposed legislation and working with our local, state, and federal officers, and also just continue to analyze existing FAA policies regarding latest updates on aviation noise abatement policy. I don't know, like for instance, when was the last time San Jose SFO, or maybe even Oakland, when was the last time their FAA policies were reviewed? And then in terms of the eligibility requirements, you know, we know that SJC in the past has had a program to, it was an airport improvement program that was created to help the homeowners in the area put in dual pane windows, air conditioning, doors, heavy duty doors, you know, to mitigate noise. But you know, I understand, but what are we doing to continue to see, you know, because the area is still being developed, what are we doing to make sure that the FAA is still following up on that kind of a program? Then we have the Health Impacts Project, which provides guidance for policymakers to identify health consequences of potential projects, like I was just talking about, to making public and national sample of health impact assessments. And then going forward, you know, as we were talking about, you know, continuing following the legislative efforts of the decibel levels, 65 to F55. And then one thing that I read about, it was actually the World Health Organization put together a report for an airport expansion in England. But one thing that they took into consideration and really did a great study on was the financial impact of airport noise on the healthcare industry, because it's not just, you know, it's not just the noise, but I mean, it affects mental health, you know, cardiovascular issues, diabetes. I mean, it just leads to a whole host of health issues. And I wondered if, you know, eventually that's something that we could be looking at as well. And also, finally, regarding future flight path decisions, should consider definitely the health implications, including where the health burden will be, and with a particular focus on vulnerable groups like seniors and children too, because children, you know, are definitely impacted by airport noise, and in terms of their being able to focus. So, so airport noise definitely has a huge impact on people, just aside from the noise on the ground, but just their health, just in long-term and short-term. I mean, there are definitely some consequences. And, you know, it's funny, you know, I went through the FAA website as well to look at noise and how noise is explored, but yet at the same time, there's still a lot of issues out there that aren't being addressed. And so it's still together, you know, working with our congressionals and gathering this information from the public and being able to put it into a paper like this, to be able to say, this is what's happening in our communities. We, you know, we need your help. I'm glad that we have this opportunity to be able to do that, because I think we know that our area is definitely impacted, and hoping that we can make a difference through this legislative committee. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. So Glenn, questions or comments?
Well, so comments. So first off, to what Kathy was referring to, I don't know if everybody knows, about the County Airport Land Use Commission that Lisa and I sit on, and I think Robert's an alternate to. That's actually an example of something where there's actually very clear, concrete definitions. Literally, if you're on 1 foot of this line or 1 foot the other side of the line, you can say yes or no, and it's very clear. And I actually find the decisions there are usually pretty easy, mostly because of the clarity of definition of what's acceptable or not acceptable, Part 77 surfaces and other things like that. In terms of this piece right here, because I want to thank Kathy for writing all this stuff up, I would kind of hope we might be able to be a little bit more focused. This is a good list of lots of different areas where there are issues, but it seems a little too broad to me, and it might be nice to be able to pick 1 or 2 of these things to try and say that what would we want to recommend, or how do we go forward with some kind of tangible action that we could go ahead and recommend be done somewhere legislatively for what goes on. That's I think they're all good points, but I would just like to see us maybe be a little more focused on what we ultimately pick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that, Glenn, and I agree. And that was the one thing that I found the hardest as I read more and more and more. It's like, what do you focus on? But I think as policymakers, we definitely have a better understanding of what's first and foremost. Like you were talking about the Airport Commission, for instance. I mean, that focuses on policy, and that drives the direction of communities. And then where do we fall, in terms of, another topic that, that will focus more, identify a health issue. Is it sleeping at night or something like that? I mean, there are several others that definitely we could, narrow it down and focus on. But I think those are definitely two different issues that I could see us focusing on. So I appreciate your perspective there.
So,
and I agree. It's very hard to get to stay, there's lots of problems. I totally agree.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. I appreciate you taking the lead on this. As I read this, I felt like I would like to see more on the environmental impact. And by that, I mean, when airplanes, I'm not even sure what the right word is, but they leave behind some fine particulate matter. And, that does have both an impact on the environment as well as people. And so I don't want to miss the fact that there are emissions from airplanes that have negative impacts. I can see where this is a tough one, because there are lots of potential health issues, and it would be hard to narrow those down. And so maybe it's a general bucket of there are absolutely health issues. There's lots of supporting evidence, but it's just, there are health issues associated with airplane noise and airplane emissions.
Mm-hmm.
I agree that there is an impact on property values, but I'm not sure that's the one we chose to focus on.
Right, I know. I threw that in there. I was like, well, it could have an impact on a person's health down the line.
Yeah.
But it does have an impact. I agree. But maybe it's one of those subtopics. Not.
Yeah. So to Glenn's comment, there's a lot here, and maybe Steve can help us narrow this down. But I also felt like I wanted more tangible recommendations. I felt like there might be some in here, but there were also some that I felt like were more information or comments.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to figure out what are the tangible things we can recommend and try to accomplish from this. This is kind of a challenging one.
Yeah, well, again, the draft and
Oh, yeah.
and so when I approached it, as I came across more and more, I said to myself, well, it is a draft. It will be reviewed and people will have input. So we will, work together on narrowing down, what we need to focus on. So I take this as all as, what do they call it? Constructive criticism. So I'm listening to everything you're saying.
Okay, thanks. Before I open it up for public comment, Steve, did you have any comments?
No,
Now that you've
Lisa,
heard us talk about this?
I would just say that to the extent that the committee would like us to refine this, we're happy to help out. When it comes to the recommendations, those should come from the committee and what you want to focus on.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so let's have public input. I see one hand, but if other folks want to speak, be sure to raise your hand. And we'll give folks, let's see, you know what, can we do 2 minutes? Because I'm a little bit concerned that we're gonna run out of time here. So Evan, if we can do 2 minutes, and we'll start with Jennifer Landesman.
I think I always encourage looking at the select recommendations because there was a whole section on process, and remind everyone that there were hundreds of people testifying from 3 counties during that process. And I would encourage seeing some of the videos of the public testifying. And there was also a survey done by the congressional representatives, which asked specific questions about impact. And I would say that if at a snapshot, the priorities that came out of the whole thing, and also from what we have seen, is that nighttime noise is a particular problem. And it happens to be the one thing which is, that could, in theory, be easily solved because there are fewer aircraft in the air at that time. So I would really, and this is also at a national level, not just a Bay Area thing. If you're going to focus on anything, I would suggest that. Lastly, I think caring about health has to do a lot with timeline of your own actions. So for example, to the extent that there is a delay in improving FAA practices and how they evaluate impacts, then the longer time that there isn't full disclosure about what's happening to people's own health. And so I really encourage you to, when you think of health, think of how powerful you can be by asking the FAA right now that on all their environmental assessments, they use metrics that go beyond their current standards. The FAA is practically offering to do that by encouraging the use of alternative metrics. And there's a lot to do, but it has to be done in practice. And from that, policies should evolve. But I would say focus on what you yourselves can do now and not wait for future legislation or for the whole thing to, for the wheel to be reinvented.
Thank you, Jennifer. Darlene? So I'm not sure why you're not unmuting. There.
Oh, there I am. Kathy, I appreciate the work you've done on this topic. In addition to noise impacts, we clearly are suffering from a health impact. And after reading your document, please consider maybe 2 categories, because I think they're important and potentially different actions and considerations. There's locations near the airport, which is mitigation programs and so on. And then there's locations away from the airport. So the effort to lower the standard from 65 to 55 near the airport may change, the number of people that could qualify for the remediation program. But for locations further out from the airport, reducing the dB to 55 still would not capture, believe it or not, the impacts that we're experiencing with NextGen, because NextGen doesn't capture, because the DNL and the standard doesn't capture that. It really masks the actual impact of the NextGen concentration. And so surprisingly enough, no residential communities are members of this roundtable and are located further away from the airport would not show a yearly DNL average of 55 or higher. So that's why I think it's specific to people at the airport, and we still need to work on Glenn's effort, which is getting the right supplemental metrics to really reflect the loudness we're having. So a shout out on including the National Academy of Science study. I think a survey of existing research by an independent organization and the identification that they would do of what's missing would be helpful, and is one of the proposed bills, which is HR 976. The other thing I think is important, because NextGen is creating a whole nother problem, is the ultrafine particulate matter studies. And there was one done in Boston. I think that needs to continue, those types of studies. Thank you.
Thank you. Marie Jo?
So I also want to thank Kathy for leading the charge on this health environmental impact. And given that this is about proposing actions for the roundtable to consider, then I have two suggestions for action. And the first one is first identify among the list of existing proposed bill, the one that relate directly to health, noise, and emission. And then once you highlight these bills, you don't have to go through the details. There's a summary. Then you know which ones the roundtable should actively support. Some, are topics in the document are already covered by existing proposed legislation. As Darlene said, Bill HR 976 already directs the FAA to work with the National Academies of Sciences, etc., on the health impacts. Also, the 2018 FAA reauthorization bill that was mentioned earlier, there are 6 sections on noise and health. So this committee should really actively, monitor, in the sense, know what happened in this section, and really get the reports when they're issued to review them and document them. The second suggestion is, I think, to identify some legislative gaps. And let me give you some examples. There are many. But for instance, why limit the cumulative impact of aircraft to only one airport? That's what they do today. All the planes that overfly communities should be considered as an impact. Why can't the state governments define significant impact? And in fact, at least one other federal agency does. The Federal Highway Administration allows the states to define a substantial noise increase relative to an ambient noise level. It's even in the report of the FAA on noise metric on page 12. Darlene mentioned, more studies on ultrafine particulates. So thank you for considering this suggestion, and hopefully we can also provide input after this meeting to help on this draft. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Holbrook?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I share the sentiment that Kathy and others have expressed, that this is a trickier one. And I think partly it is because the scaffolding for setting policy is not really that well structured. Here, Section 189 of the FAA reauthorization bill and the proposed legislation, which are the first 2 rows in the matrix we're about to look at as item number 6, HR 976 and HR 2351, can provide us, or maybe I should say policymakers, with a more grounded basis for choosing boundaries for their policies. And I think it's really important for us to be tracking that work. The Section 189 report, unfortunately, is not due for another 1.5 years. The other observation that I would make, and I think this is more actionable, is I don't believe that residents, as represented by their local representatives, are considered stakeholders by the FAA in setting next-gen policy or setting or in procedure changes. I think they are viewed as people to be notified after the fact. And I believe it would be helpful to have a bill that explicitly states that residents, as represented by their local representatives, are to be considered co-equal stakeholders in setting FAA policy. Lastly, I did submit a comment earlier, which out of a lack of time, I won't speak to because I believe Lisa will read it into the record. Thank you.
Jennifer T.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Kathy, for doing this work. Couple of things. I think the document generally has to be divided into two areas. Of course, the background information, which kind of gives the historical and some of the studies that have already been done, and then what we expect. And when I'm saying that, like what Mary Jo was saying, kind of referring to what bills we want to support and what we really want. When I've gone and seen my Congress member, they have always asked me, what specifically do you want me to do? And so when we're writing this, I think we almost need to be remedial in asking that question. In other words, it's called KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And that I think is really important if our audience is the Congress members, and I think they are. We need to be very focused on what we want done and what we expect them to do. And I agree as far as the ultrafine emissions, that's very, very important. So I'll just leave it at that. Just keep it simple if we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to provide input? I don't see any other hands up from the public. Okay, bring it back to the committee. Kathy or Steve, did you have any, I'm Steve, or Glenn, have any comments?
I appreciate everybody that, again, that submitted, their comments, and I've been squirrely writing a lot of information down here. And I will say one thing. I know Darlene Yapley, and when she shared some information with me, she had mentioned about the fine particle matters, and I had looked for more information on it, and I couldn't find any, because I totally agree that that is definitely a residual effect of takeoff that impacts communities, people with asthma. It adds to health issues. So, but I did try to find more information on, I don't know, somebody was hiding it, I don't know, but I couldn't find it. And so Darlene, I know you're listening, share something else with me, because I was having difficulty on that one, but I agree 100%. And so in terms of, what I'm hearing is, following through on like taking the reauthorization bill and the sections from there that have to do with health, and also the legislative gaps. That's another area. Historical. Jennifer T, I think it was, mentioned historical historical area, and I'm not sure I quite understand what she means. I don't know if she wants to drop me an email on that. And but more importantly, I think the deliverable is ultimately what we want to achieve, and so what do we expect? So I think that's a good conclusion. On a topic that has a lot of nuances, but I appreciate everybody's input and direction.
So I forgot to read into the record the other email we got. So let me do that now. This is on this item. There are some citations in this email that I will forward to everyone regarding the impact on the, let's see, the property value of homes depending upon how close you are to the airport and the noise you experience. And also, there's comments about cost of upgrading windows for noise. And wow, it says can equal or exceed the drop in value of the home. And unlike home sales prices, the windows, the relief to one set of homeowners cannot be offset in a cost benefit analysis against the costs incurred by homeowners to whom noise is shifted. There is no rebate for windows installed years ago. And I certainly favor the position that the FAA should consider in its cost benefit analysis the impacts of the actions on all stakeholders, recognizing that affected homeowners are important stakeholders in the FAA decision. So thank you, Mr. Holbrook. Glenn.
Yeah, I'm just going to go back. I think all this is good stuff. I just think we need to focus on what it is we're going to go ahead and do. And it might be, maybe there's a way to group some of these topics that have been discussed, you know, and then I would just pick one group of where we want to go ahead and try and focus to go ahead and move forward. And then I just have a procedural question. Are we going to go with 3 o'clock as a hard stop, or do I need to try and change something on my calendar?
So I was thinking that we would probably continue the last item to another meeting so that we will shoot to finish here at 3 o'clock.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so I feel like, as has been mentioned, this is a very broad topic. And I do want us to focus so that, I feel like a broken record there, focus so that we can make progress on something. And so, you know, I appreciate the comments about the nighttime noise having a huge impact. You know, if we divided this into, you know, groups, and I'm trying to figure out what would the groupings be. And I feel like, you know, maybe it is just all about health, and it's your health based upon the noise you experience. It's also the health based upon the emissions that get released that you're potentially breathing. And it does now, as I'm thinking about this, I feel like it does all come down to health. And that's a huge, important issue. So if it could be couched in health, and maybe, I'm not sure if there's categories of health, but maybe that's the way to group it. I guess, you know, Steve, I was wondering if you have any guidance on this one for us, because it is such a big topic.
Yeah, it is a big topic, Lisa. It's also one in which there are ongoing studies all the time. And unfortunately, in many cases, the studies conclude that there needs to be more studies. So we don't have something concrete we can put our arms around. I would second what you said. Is I would feel like this group would want to be focused on a few issues related to health impacts of noise and emissions, and then drill down on those and have, I think what Jennifer T said was, you know, what do you expect? What do you want from me in terms of legislation in moving that direction? And to the extent that we can help out with that, we're happy to. If Kathy wants to give this another shot and we can review that, it's fine with us.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, Steve. In terms of health, I think we could break that down into physical health as well as mental health, because that's, I mean, there are two different areas, and that mental health came about as I was reading through documents. And then in terms of environmental, I think the particles, again, you know, the emissions from takeoff, definitely, I mean, I'm happy to do more to focus on those two areas, if that makes sense. And then ultimately, what do we expect? What do we want to do next? I've made those 3 notes to myself here. If that sounds like it takes in everything that we've just heard and what you just shared, Steve. What do you think?
It does, Kathy.
Okay.
Sorry, I had a hard time hearing Steve.
I said it does, Kathy.
Thank you. Of course, I live in an HOA and the gardeners are here today. And of course, they're right outside my windows. They've been here all day, but today they're focusing, it seems like, right here. Okay, so, I just had a thought. Do we have any data, whether it be from like a public survey or from publications like a study or something that says which things are the top 3 things that have an impact on somebody's health? Like, is it nighttime flights? Because then you have poor sleep. Is it, the emissions right around the airport? And then is there a third? Well, I feel like I've heard from the public during the day when the noise is constant, you have a really difficult time concentrating and getting anything done.
Right.
So
I think Jennifer had mentioned the select committee and the testimony and survey that was done, which put together a list of impacts that stakeholders shared, the impacts to of airplane noise, airport noise, and mentioning the nighttime noise as well. So I didn't know about that, obviously, and so I would like to go back and find that select committee testimony and report and just see what the survey produced and see how it can possibly fit into this these suggested areas and work off of that as well. I think that's a good resource.
okay. So Kathy, do you feel like you have enough direction? Are you going to take the
If you
next
saw
crack
the
at this?
paper in front of me right now, you would know.
Okay. So on this
Can you
one,
hear
you'll
it?
do you'll do the next rev.
There you go.
Okay, and then do you also want to let folks know that they can send you input by a
Yeah.
certain date?
Of course, Darlene's already done it, and I think so. They know where to find me.
Okay, do you want to set a deadline date?
When did we just set the deadline date? Was it September 11th?
It was.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
that sounds good as well.
Is that good for you? Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
So great. So no other comments on this one. So the next one I do feel like is a bigger topic than perhaps we want to tackle today. That's item 6. And I did send out the current status of the legislation and nothing has moved. I guess what I would say is for next time, it'd be great if members of this committee as well as the public could take a look at that and provide us with input on which you think are the most important. I really don't think much is going to happen this legislative session. So I'm kind of thinking ahead to the next session. What do we potentially want to ask our congressional representatives to focus on? But I will ask Kathy if she has an update on the information she shared at the last roundtable meeting, if there's been any update on that.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. No, and I apologize that I didn't get the our public affairs folks at Townsend sent us information at my request, but got it to us on Friday just after the deadlines, and I sent it to you as soon as I received it, but it still didn't get there in time. But no, it just I think they even say themselves that they went through 10 of the bills that you reference in the chart that you put together, the legislation, and I know that there are 15 and not 10, so I don't know why they only identified 10. However, what they did say was, and I'm wondering, when I shared the information at our last roundtable meeting, there was one item that talked about increasing funding by $5 million for the FAA to hire additional staff to increase its community engagement capacity. And from reading their follow-up, it just says, unlike the bill itself, committee reports are not subject to full chamber approval, and these instructions to the FAA will go into effect immediately upon finalization of fiscal year 2021 funding. And so I'm wondering if it's possible, if we need our congressional reps to follow up with these two particular congressmen or this congressman, Harley Ruda, and find out exactly what impact we can have, if possible, on how that money is allocated, and in terms of maybe, getting more representatives as staff on the ground, to monitor ground noise. So I'm just wondering what impact we could have on something like that. And I'm happy to follow up with our Townsend and find out if you would like me to do that, and ask specifically, or Tom Pike, what they could possibly do to help us in that respect, if that's something that you're interested in. But I think, like you said, no new aircraft noise specific legislation has been introduced as a standalone bill in Congress this year so far, and all the bills introduced since the beginning of the 116th Congress have been referred to the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, but have continued to remain at a standstill. So
I think it makes sense that they're at a standstill. There's lots of other things they're focused on. Yeah, so sorry, I was just asking you specifically about the one, the House Appropriations Committee report, because that wasn't a bill.
Right,
and so we didn't have information on that. So I personally think it would be great if you could follow up with Townsend on that one to see what they recommend we do to try to influence that one.
Totally. Okay, I agree 100%. Okay.
Okay. Glenn, did you have anything?
No, thank you.
Okay. So we have just a couple minutes here. And since we sort of discussed that topic, I will open it up for public input if anybody has any comments on that one. Otherwise, we'll take this one up in much more detail at the next meeting. Jennifer Landesman, and if we could do 2 minutes.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to remind that UFPs, or ultrafine particles, and partial, the droppings of partially burnt jet fuel, are also an impact on arrival flight paths. And this is very, there's a science about, at what altitude these are an impact. The FAA has been doing a study on that, so I would encourage looking into that. But there was no scientific certainty that these, for example, impact only below 3,000 feet. It could be 4,000 or 5,000 feet. It always depends on where the air is blowing as well. But I would encourage looking at that, but it's not just a departure or near airport issue. It's very much an arrivals issue as well. And
okay, so we're talking about item 6 now, which is the legislation.
Sorry, I thought this was the final public comment.
No, we're talking about item 6 right now.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that. So I will just, I don't know what I should do. Should I just leave this as my final comment and that's
yeah, we didn't have a time for final comments. This is the last item on the list, and then we adjourn.
Related then, because in terms of tracking appropriations and legislation and so forth, as Steve mentioned, there's always studies that then require more studies. It would be great to track all those studies that are already underway, such as the particulates, UFP emissions. There's all these numbers for them, and then track, how spending is coming along, both with appropriations and the bills that have already been passed. So I'll just add that, and UFP is one of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Holbrook?
A couple points. First, my sense talking with folks in other parts of the country is that particulate emissions is a topic that has legs, that maybe mental and physical health, well, mental health anyhow, might not. I don't mean to diminish that, but I think that particulate emission is something that people can glom onto and may have some attractiveness. And I would observe that it may well be that the particulate emissions are worse under rails. And the particulate emission may be, to some extent, a proxy for the whole question of precision-based navigation and its negative impacts on people, which of course are broader than just the particles themselves.
Okay, so again, I want to clarify that we're talking about item 6, which is the bills that have been introduced.
Yeah,
and
so I'm referring to line item 2 there, which is HR 2351.
Okay.
Okay, which is exactly that. And then the second thing that I wanted to say was responding to Member Hendricks, who said, yeah, I looked at these and the chance that any of these bills are going to pass is roughly 0. And here I just wonder what the process for making legislative sausage is. It wouldn't surprise me to learn that if we were to go back 5 years, there was a similar list and most of this stuff was ranked at about 0, but that maybe half of these things found their way into the FAA Reauthorization Act a couple of years later. So while these may not pass as bills themselves, maybe it's a way that they get teed up for the next Reauthorization Act, which admittedly is a few years out, but still there may be progress. I'd be interested in understanding what the truth is from people that understand it better than I do. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other hands up, so we'll close public input on item 6. I just want to add to that's why I had item 6 on here, because I was thinking ahead to, I doubt if any of these are going to pass this session, but we should start thinking about the next session and what we want to talk to our congressional representatives about. Okay, any other comments from Glenn or Kathy?
No, I'm good.
No, thank you.
Okay, Steve.
I am good. Great meeting. Thank you, Lisa.
Evan.
I think great job.
Oh, I'm seeing if you had anything else to add. Okay, well, thank you all for participating. I appreciate it. And again, we're shooting for September 11th, get public input on items 4 and 5. And then our next session, we will go through the next version of those 2 documents. So thank you again, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon. Meeting's adjourned at 2:58.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.